Welcome to Biz Meds with Darris and Saad, where we give you the medications for your business. This podcast is all about the minimum effective doses you need to make a massive improvement in your business. Listen and enjoy.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Biz Meds. We are your hosts. My name is Saad.
And I'm Darris.
So for today's episode, we wanted to kind of touch back on our initial, very first episode, which you guys might remember, cognitive load. The reason why we want to talk about cognitive load again is because there's a completely different aspect to cognitive load that tacks on, and it's called being overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, the reason why I want to talk about that is because when you're overwhelmed, it starts to shut down all of your cognitive functions. And specifically with the cognitive load topic, you guys might remember we were talking about how your entire bodily responses or your mental reactions to things just shut down and you can't do it. The reason why a lot of people get overwhelmed is because they're not in control, or they don't feel in control. So when you're so taxed with things that you need to get done, your brain is backed up and you kind of lose control. You lose the ability to navigate through the problem.
Absolutely. And with that, overwhelm is kind of, it's also that feeling where everything just feels like it's so much. And typically the standard reaction to that is I don't do anything. So things just stop. And so that's a very common thing that plays out from when people go into overwhelm. That cognitive load goes really high. It's like, again, having all those browsers open on your computer, everything slows down. And as a result, when you go into overwhelm, the typical response is that's when you freeze because you don't know what to do, right? There's just so much happening that it's hard to navigate what to do.
In the immediate, yeah.
In the immediate. And so what happens is you do nothing, and then think about what happens after that is the emotional response to knowing that you need to be doing something, but because you're so overwhelmed and you don't do things, then what happens is the flywheel of emotion, so the guilt and everything starts to set in, and that becomes more and more demotivating because you're just so locked into an immense amount of overwhelm. And I didn't realize that I was actually having that which was the lead up to me discovering the science of flow and things like that. And I had no idea. And so when I first started to dive into it, it was kind of that big epiphany, that big aha moment of, wow, I didn't even realize, we talked last week, I think it was around, we don't know how distracted we are. Well, we also really don't really realize like how many things are just contributing to overwhelm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you just kind of reminded me of something. Overwhelm is anxiety from the future.
That is, you know what? That I'm so glad you said that. That is exactly. I've heard that, and when I heard that, I was like, oh wow, absolutely, it is.
Yeah, because and it's take it as a compliment, because a lot of times when people really know what they need to do, they can see the path forward. They can see where they need to be at. Mm-hmm. And it's when you're so cognitively loaded, you start finding that, this is going to take this much energy, this is going to take that much energy, this is going to take that much energy, and then you immediately lose track of how to move forward and take the first step. Yeah. And that's when like
you don't even know which step to take.
Exactly.
There's so many.
Yeah.
And you just, again, you don't do anything.
Yeah, and
it plays right out.
Pulling anxiety from the future.
And what is it? Is it depression is from the past?
Yeah, depression is
spending your time pulling it from the past.
You guys heard it here first. Anxiety is in the future. Anxiety is pulling from the future, and depression's from the past.
It's a really. I mean, we've been batting the topic back and forth now for a while, and it's always an interesting thing when you start to distill kind of these ideas and why do we want to talk about overwhelm? Well, I mean, when you think about most business owners, right, it's one of the most common things that as they start to talk about what they're going through, and when you're able to label it, they have that aha moment of, oh, wow, I really didn't even know what that was. So there's that. I think that's an important part of this process is talking about that. And let's name some of those things so that people can actually understand what they're going through and start to associate with what is the exact process they're going through.
Exactly.
The other second part of that is, guess what? You're not alone in that. You are completely with every other business owner, entrepreneur, if you feel that sense of overwhelm. And actually, you're just like probably everybody else on your team that has gone through that exact same emotion of feeling overwhelmed, which I think we'll dive into a little bit, where, overwhelm for a business owner, thinking about all the bigger picture of what we want to do, what we want to achieve, and how are we going to do that when it feels like we're bombarded with so many different options. Every guru is out there, trying to tell you this is the perfect thing to do. And so you have all of that. And then you have the pure distractions of everything. And so as a business owner, like, it's hard not to feel overwhelmed. And then when you take that and dive into a business, you have people that work with you, and guess what? They feel overwhelmed too.
Well, it's funny because sometimes you'll see people telling you to just continue pushing through, just keep going through, and then you'll be on the other end, without completely appreciating that not every situation is exactly the same.
Well, where I have become allergic to that idea of just push through is that if you brought up anxiety earlier, and so someone who may have anxiety, I will say, like, it's hard for me sometimes to relate to when people talk about anxiety, because I don't necessarily feel or relate to that word anxiety. Overwhelm, yes, things like that. But having a daughter that has gone through social anxiety and things like that, diving into those topics and understanding that, say, oh, you just push through, is the equivalent of saying to someone who has anxiety or depression, just be happy or just don't worry about it. And if it was just that simple, well, oh my goodness, like, yeah. Oh, you just push through.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a reason why that probably doesn't work or work as well.
Yeah.
And there's probably better ways to do that. Hence why I think this is a great forum to actually have that conversation of why do we want to talk about overwhelm, and why is that so important? Why does that continually be something that business owners continually face, day in and day out?
And I really love that you said this, just about 2 minutes ago, about how the purpose of these podcasts is to help you identify things that are already out there and a lot of people are running into. So being overwhelmed, we're not reinventing the wheel. This is not a word that we just came up with. A lot of times, I'm gonna relate it to going to a doctor. A lot of times when you get a little injury and you delay going to the doctor, to get back to 100%, there's one, solution to it. Whether you go to the doctor in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks or in 1 day, the result's going to be the same. Like the procedure to get through is going to be the exact same. Yeah. And the purpose of us identifying these things and sharing them on this, on the podcast in this format is so that people, when they do run into it, they don't end up feeling that they
because you will run into it. That's the thing. Yeah. You will run into it.
Yeah, and exactly, that's the reality, because you feel that now that you run into it, you don't know how to navigate through, so you you see the first video of somebody telling you, just push through, you can do it, like you can get through it.
Yeah.
And not really comprehending what it is that you're actually feeling in the moment and what it's doing to your business life.
Yeah. And let's be very clear. We're identifying that. We're identifying those pitfalls and things like that. It will not change how unpleasant it feels. Like that won't change. It's very similar to, I will say, the grieving process. And so when I went through divorce, I went through a like extreme grieving process. And then when my father passed away, I mean, I was just more prepared for what the process was. I understood what the process was. I could also help other people understand what the process was. Didn't make it suck any less. The only difference was I had a better framework for understanding what was happening and that there was a way through. And maybe that's a good reminder is that there's always a way through. There's like, so just because you may feel overwhelmed, you may feel burned out, you may feel stuck and all that stuff, that's fine. You will feel that. That does not mean that that is where you're destined to stay or that is the end state, because there's always a way through.
Yeah. No, definitely. And, but my first time being overwhelmed, I was in the state where, well, for me, overwhelmed specifically, I shut down. Like I need a moment to like really get out of the situation and unwind and really recalibrate myself.
So what I'm hearing is that you respond best by just pushing through.
Yes, definitely. I used to be like that, and the consequences of doing that was worse than taking a step back and just taking a moment. Even when if I have a lot of things going on and I'm working on several things all at once, I could be killing them. But the second I get some type of bad news about anything, I cannot push through. Like I need to like just, remove myself from everything, and kind of work through my own mental hurdle that's stopping me from moving over to or doing what I need to get done. And it wasn't up until like I started, we talked about it more, is where I realized like the way I progress is by, focusing on me first, on, unbundling the problem, unbundling like what that really means. And again, removing the future anxiety and bringing myself back into the present, because anything that's in the future, it hasn't happened yet. So why bother spending your energy focusing on something that could
You are
happen?
describing the quintessential human experience, is that we love to just jump on things and worry about things that have not happened. And I don't say that, I say that tongue in cheek, but that's literally what we do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't do that. I mean, that's who we are as humans.
Yeah.
We're a very human condition.
But the funny thing, like you said, when you're going through it, it does, these logical thoughts don't come to you. It's a lot harder to say all this and apply all of this when you're going through it versus when you're on the opposite end or you're trying to help somebody else navigate through it. It's a lot.
That goes back to that framework of, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And that's so when emotion goes up, intelligence goes down. So when you're in an emotional state, so you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not going to think logically. Like that is just a physiological response. So that's our human response. Our brains, when we're emotionally elevated, we don't think logically. It shuts down that part of the brain where we go to our more base fight, flight, freeze scenario. And so what you're describing is the actual process, the process that we go through, our brains go through every time that happens. And what is overwhelm? Overwhelm is that a logical or like really low emotional state? It's high emotional state. And so when that happens is typically that's when, people get overwhelmed. So what do? They either react emotionally, right? Or they don't do anything. So that's the freeze, right? So, or they run away
Yeah.
and try to run away from it. And that's, again, that's just all the very normal responses that we have. So, okay, so what can you do about overwhelm? Well, I think you just did the perfect intro to what we can do about overwhelm. And it's, if we go back to when we talked about the importance of questions and you were talking about that future anxiety, it's that first question is, it's what you want to do is put things into two buckets, right? And actually this is probably what works really well for this is a writing exercise. And you just write out all of the things that you feel are happening or you are worrying about or that's stressing you out that are causing all of this and that you feel. And this is not the time where you start to evaluate them. This is just the exercise of transferring that down onto a piece of paper. That is the first part of the exercise. And then from there, this is the fun part, is now you get to ask yourself, do I have control over this or do I not have control over this? So by asking, do I have control over this? And if you don't have control over it, then that's where you're able to start then working through that opportunity to say, okay, well then if I don't have any control of this, this is something I need to then remove from my worry or, the thing that's stressing about, because I don't have any control. So why am I allowing it to have that kind of control over me? And then start to bucket it over there. Okay, good. Now, and then you have a list of things that are under your control. And that shifts, funny enough, we'll call the locus of control from external. So where do I believe that, am I victim or victor? It's that which mentality, the growth or fixed mindset. And what that does is it gives you more agency. It gives you more, you're now going to be the active part of that and say, okay, well now I have the ability, I can control these. Well, now I can decide which is the most important or which one it's the easiest one for me to do and start to reestablish the feeling like I have more control in it and use that to continually build the belief and move forward.
Right.
So that's a very simple exercise. When you're feeling that overwhelm is to go through that. And that's a really good exercise to do. And remember, so it's first of all, just write down everything. Don't judge. It's just put it all down. All the things that are flying around your head, because if you don't write it down and you try to do this mentally, it will not have the same effect. There's this, I don't know what the mechanism's called. All I know is that in all of my learning, in all the growth and all the things that I've had to deal with, that these exercises are typically done I don't know what the mechanism is that causes when you write that down and go through that process, it just works.
So for that specifically, I feel when you're writing it down, you have 100% focus on that thing specifically. Even when you write the word overwhelm, in that low moment, your mind is just fully focused on that. And then it's automatically creating like the things that connect to it. And like filling
and you're now removing yourself from the future and you're bringing yourself right to the present, and which is where focus belongs, right here in the present, not out there. It's focuses in the here and the now. And so it brings you and removes all the other stuff from your mind, and you can focus only on that task, which again removes you from that future anxiety. And then now write that out. And then the next part is this in my control or not? If it's on your control, okay, good. You need to appreciate the fact that you or anyone else will have control over that. Now you can just focus on the things that you do have control of. And you'll probably find that list is very small. And that's good.
Yeah.
Because now it's a lot easier to go attack that and like, okay, well, what can I, and then the question is, what can I do about that? All right, what can I do about that right now? And then you're shifting now from being the victim, now you're being active, engaged, and now moving forward. So it's how quickly you can shift yourself out of that and into. So I would say that's probably one of the best exercises to be able to kind of identify when you're going to overwhelm, and then how do you get yourself out. And the kicker is you have to sit down and do the exercise.
Yeah, and the perfect thing about that whole is you mentioned this earlier in the podcast. The number of browsers you have open
Yes.
in your brain, because when you remove yourself and you actually do the written thing, it starts closing the browsers
Absolutely.
that you can't, that are just not loading.
Yeah.
That are just error 404, right? You know, the ones that
File
just
not
don't,
found.
yeah, exactly. Just those ones, they're being closed down, and now you're actually focusing on the ones that you can actually do stuff on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point. So I know earlier though, there was that's the big, like, here as a business owner and you're doing your things, and that's kind of like the big level overwhelm. Now I want to talk about why does overwhelm, or like what happens when the people you're working with, how do you spot it, or what do you do, or what causes that specifically? So we have talked about this, and I know probably there's a lot of people listening to this that have heard this in different ways, and there's different ways to think about it, but there's typically a nice little, if you think just like a quadrant, right? So 4 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm doing that in reverse for the camera. And in your bottom left corner is you're unconsciously incompetent, right? So you don't know what you don't know. And that's basically, say you have a new employee, they show up, they don't really know what they're doing, right? They don't even know what they don't know. That's the unconsciously incompetent. And then you have people that have a little more awareness. So you get exposed to a few things. So now you know that you don't know. So you kind of move over one to the right, which is your consciously incompetent. So I know that I don't know. Okay. And that's where a lot of people that work in our organizations exist, right? Or we hire new people, and we're having to teach them. And then as you do something and you gain more competence, right? So you become way more skilled at doing something, and your confidence goes up and everything like that. And you can think about something and do it. You don't need someone kind of watching over you, reminding you all the time, but you're very confident or competent in what you do. You become consciously competent. I know I have to think about it, and I do, right? And then we talked about in the episode or on skill versus mastery, right? So ideally you get to the point where you're in the top left quadrant, and that's we call those the unconsciously competent. I just know and I do. I don't even have to think about it, right? It's like driving a vehicle. For the most things that we do in our vehicles, we don't have to think about it because we're unconsciously competent. We just know and do. And that's what happens, right? Now, the challenge is that for a lot of things that we do in business and when we're bringing people in, we assume that they should know how to do something. And where we're operating from the I just know and do. I don't think about all the little steps I would have to go through to do something. And so what we do is we have these new people that are just coming in, they're the unconsciously incompetent, now maybe the consciously incompetent. They don't really know what's going on. And we just say, go do this. Because for us, it's just logical. It's simple. Everybody you have to be kidding me. Like, come on, this is a basic level skill.
Yeah.
Well, that's wrong. That's in all of my experience in organizations, working with organizations, that is categorically the
False. Yeah.
false.
Yeah.
And what happens is, so you have someone, and I know because I have done this, and this is why I've learned the lesson, is that I say, go do this, because for me, I just know and do. So I'm now frustrated because I see this person. I told you to do something. I assume that you know how to do it, or I've trained you. I'm going to use training in air quotes, right? I feel like I've done this great level of training, and this person should go and do it. Well, I get frustrated because I think that person is of low intelligence. This is my politically correct way of saying you're stupid. And the person on the receiving end of that, guess what? They get overwhelmed. And as a result, they get frustrated, and more often than not, they quit. Right? They don't do anything. They're frustrated because they don't know. And that's the whole point.
Yeah, and they're afraid to ask for help because now they
don't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
Like they're just we're just people. We're all just people trying to figure all this shit out. And it's not always easy, but we tend to, as business owners, leaders, managers, all those things, we want to tell somebody we actually really suck at training people. Or we have the mentality, I've seen the mentality quite a few times of, well, they're just going to leave anyway, so why do I train them? Well, what's the risk that they stay and you don't train them? That's much worse. So going back to the whole, let's tie it back to, sorry, I'm kind of waxing along in the, we just have to be really careful that when we are working with people in our companies and we're bringing people on, we actually, as leaders, have to dial it back to consciously competent. So I have to think about it and do it and break it down and not glaze over all the steps that are inherent in doing those things. And we have to ask really great questions of people to help them understand and be able to support them at every level. Because if they go into overwhelm, right, and then you're going into overwhelm because you're now stressed out about all the things, no one's going to do anything. And it's probably, I would say there's a big contributing factor to why businesses don't survive or, people quit.
Yeah. Well, that's usually why, businesses crash and burn, because they just, this is it. They don't know what to do next.
Yeah. So that's overwhelm. I think there's probably a lot more. And then I think the one last thing I'll say about overwhelm is that, as we tie it back to cognitive load, that one of the things I've noticed, and there's a lot of studies around it, even we talked about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, kind of the godfather of flow. And one of the things that he talked about was that physical items also can occupy cognitive space, right? And so as a result of that, if you have a lot of stuff, you have a lot of things, there's a higher probability that you have higher cognitive load just because all of that stuff like occupies cognitive space. And there would be, and I've seen it, I mean, there's a reason why being able to get more focus is the art of getting more focus is being able to say no. And the more you can say no to things, it means that you're taking away the distractions, taking away stuff. So there's an idea that you could actually, remove a lot of physical things, and that would help also free up a lot of mental cognitive horsepower for you. I know it's kind of like on the tail end of the conversation.
Yeah. No, I think this is a great, I'm biased, but I think it was a great podcast to talk about, great topic. But if I was to summarize one thing that really stood out to me is to take that moment to sit down and write down the things that are specifically causing you that headache and that overwhelm, to start navigating through to the things that you can actually do versus the things that you think you need to do, but there's nothing you can do about them.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is the one thing, that is the minimum effective dose that you can do to really destroy overwhelm.
Yeah.
And move through it a lot faster.
Yeah. I think this is a perfect spot to call this podcast.
I will concur.
Okay.
So we're just going to say thank you to everyone who continues to
support us.
That views, listens, all the things, all of the very kind messages we get from everyone. Thank you. Saad's mom, thank you. Always love hearing that you enjoy the episodes. Mom, thank you for continuing to listen and support. And everyone else, if you're new to the show, welcome. We're Biz Meds. We're here, the minimum effective dose for your business. And remember, you're just one day away from the life you've always wanted. We will see you in the next episode.
I try to sync that. Thanks, everyone.